ahead and this meeting has been So we wanted to start off a little bit differently today. We have a bunch of stuff that we'd love to talk about, and we can rant and ramble for as long as you will tolerate us, obviously, but we would rather sort of open the floor from the get-go to make sure that everyone has time to sort of talk about high-profile issues that they're running into, how you're using PowerShell, how you're thinking about using PowerShell, what's blocking you from using it, or PowerShell 6 more specifically, and yeah, are we doing a good job, and if not, where can we be doing a better job? We really just want to, I think, if somebody wants to just sort of claim the voice in chat, and then we can have them unmute and talk, that would be awesome.
Or all of you can jump together.
Or yeah, go ahead, yeah. But we really are just interested in what you guys have to say and whether this has been working for you or not. So Eugene, unmute for a second.
Yeah. Oh, now.
You're going to call people out?
Now, Joey is policing everybody who's even thinking about talking.
We definitely want this to be more interactive. Whoever wants to jump in.
So does anybody... Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Eugene. Oh, no, trying to fix your audio. Trevor, is the OMI PSRP remoting component going to be built into PowerShell, or will it stay as a separate package? So why don't you unmute yourself, talk a little bit more about that, Trevor. What exactly are you looking for? Where does that question come from? Oh, can't unmute. No problem. Oh, of course. Of course, yeah, you're probably got headphones in and sneaking some community call. Yeah, so I think right now, are you talking about the OMI PSRP remoting component on the server side? So in other words, you want to be able to do anywhere client server, but you're talking about WinRM-based or WSMan-based remoting into a Linux or Mac.
Like into or from?
WSMan and SSH-based, right? So, the current way that we do things, and this is for everyone's education, we currently ship sort of 3 out of 4 of the matrix built into so outbound to Windows Server, right? SSH-based Linux or Mac. So we currently ship like 3 out of the 4 sort of quadrants in the remoting matrix built into PowerShell. So there's essentially Windows to Linux SSH-based. There's Linux to Windows SSH-based. There's Linux to Windows WSMan-based. And all 3 of those are built into the package today. So you should not have to download any additional dependencies to do any of those. The 4th one that we have not included, sort of quote-unquote, in the box is Windows to Linux WSMan-based. And that's because it requires OMI as a dependency. And OMI is not something that everyone wants deployed. And so, we really, I really need to get the remoting instructions up to sort of discuss how one does that once they install OMI, if you're interested in doing that. Trevor's asking a follow-up question here, whether the SSH-based remoting is exclusive to Core Edition. Today, that's the case, yes. There is some...
There's no current plan to support SSH PSRP with Windows PowerShell.
But I'm personally working through what that means. I mean, I talked to a lot of folks at PowerShell Conference EU that would highly desire that in the desktop edition. Unfortunately, it's becoming more and more difficult for us to add new features to that thing, the desktop edition, as we sort of diverge with PowerShell 6. So I've heard remoting is working today. I haven't seen how to actually use it. It looks complex to actually set up at the moment. Yeah, so...
Are you talking about the WSM remoting or the SSH remoting, or both?
And by the way, if we could just get +1s in the chat from everyone else who agrees that remoting is one of the critical scenarios
Well, that's kind of
I don't.
big question, isn't it?
I think so, but no, I want to make sure that this is useful to everyone so that we're not plus one critical. Yeah.
So here's the thing: is that we're definitely promoting PowerShell remoting over SSH as the premier remoting experience because that's really cross-platform. So we really hit a couple of technical issues on implementing WSMan on Linux and Mac. So we don't have NTLM support on Mac, and then we don't have Kerberos support on either Linux or Mac. And currently there's no plans to really do that because some of the supporting libraries just aren't available. So it's pretty expensive to do that from scratch. As far as SSH remoting is concerned, we do have an open issue that I believe I marked as high priority, and we'll talk about that in a bit, to have a commandlet call enable SSH remoting, which and we're hoping to leverage Darwin's work on installing OpenSSH on Windows and ideally also on Linux. So if you just do enable SSH remoting, then the right stuff happens, the right packages get installed, and the configuration happens so that you can do it both from a client and server side depending on what your needs are. So we are looking towards simplifying that experience, but that hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, so there's really two big things here. I mean, one, if you're on a machine that has OpenSSH deployed, I mean, most of this stuff here is just installing OpenSSH to Windows. But if you've got PowerShell 6 installed and you've got OpenSSH installed, much easier on a Linux machine, obviously, all you need to do is add this line to your SSHD config and restart SSH. So it's really just as simple as saying, hey, that's the PowerShell that I want to be able to do SSH remoting into, and it has to support SSH-based remoting, obviously. And then this argument here says run in SSH subsystem mode, which essentially says, operate as a subsystem on the server. So you've got an example scenario: deploy a Docker on Linux microservice that remotely triggers jobs on Windows Server. Yeah, that's totally doable. I think even with PowerShell 6 today. So there's no reason why that shouldn't work just how you want it to. Definitely give it a try. Like I said, I've linked to this doc here. There's also this enable SSH remoting. This is an RFC that we'd love to get some more feedback on. Basically, and I'll paste this link in the I'll make sure we're looking at the most recent copy. So yeah, this is essentially, hey, how can we make it easier for Windows admins to enable SSH remoting? Pull down OpenSSH, install the dependencies, so on and so forth. I will say also, for those of you that are Windows insiders, we have shipped OpenSSH as a optional feature on demand in the latest Fast Ring Insider build. So it's not super functional right now. There'll be a blog out when it is, but yeah, just definitely stay keep your eyes peeled for that. Okay, cool. Does anyone else have anything, hot topics for them? Stefan, I see you've got unmuted there. Linux to Windows is NTLM, yes, today for WSMan-based remoting. We don't support Kerberos, unfortunately, but SSH is everything. Remoting client end to Windows even after you ship SSH in the box. Yeah, so again, it's a current plan of record. I wouldn't say that it's set in stone, and the more we talk about this, the better, I think.
But just to be clear, we are shipping. So as what Joey mentioned in terms of the feature on demand, OpenSSH composed of two parts, SSHD and SSH.exe. And both parts are feature on demand as separate features. So those are going to be in the latest fast rings for 110.
But I think he's talking about the PowerShell remoting SSH client would not be in the box.
Not for Windows PowerShell, correct. There's a separate item.
This is Joel. I just want to raise that because, in fact, I typed this up earlier and I'm going to paste it even though I'm going to say it out loud. I mentioned in Slack the other day that PowerShell 6 is not ever going to ship in the box, and I had a whole bunch of people go, wait, what? No, you're kidding, right? And asked me to prove it, and I could not find a blog post, a web page, a statement in the open source plan for PowerShell 6. I couldn't find anything that would back me up on that clearly. I think it needs to be said a little bit better, but the fact that that is the plan makes it a little bit more of a problem that we're talking about shipping OpenSSH to Windows 10, but we're not talking about shipping PowerShell 6, and we're not talking about shipping SSH commandlets. That's because if you're not shipping WinRM onto all the other platforms where PowerShell is going to go, then you've created this situation where I have to go and install PowerShell 6, from wherever it happens, off of GitHub, really, to my, at least to my
so a
dev.
couple things that I first want to unpack. First, totally legitimate. Like, I came back from Conference EU, and it's clear that, like, we just need to be writing more blogs in general, just talking about where we're at with the project status, so on and so forth. So totally act on that front. I think Steve was going to say something about the installation of
well, there's two parts. So right now there is no current plan to ship PowerShell Core 6 in Windows. That's not to say we don't plan to ever ship it. There's definitely like logistical problems being in Windows. And one of the things I want to solve in the short term or medium term is making it easier to install PowerShell Core 6 on Windows, right? Like on Linux, we actually have I think we have a good experience being in packages at Microsoft.com. You can apt-get or yum it, and that works well. On Windows, we don't have a thing yet. App Store is something we actually, Joey's been looking at.
Yeah, so there's a million distribution mechanisms. I think the one that's sort of the fallback is like a package management provider that, just is hard-coded. I think we all agree that going out to GitHub and downloading an MSI is not the mechanism that we want to be the supported installation mechanism for. I will say some store app. Yes, we actually ship the AppX today in every from AppBear build. So if you go out to our AppBear, let's go the correct way here. I will. If you go to the README, from the README. So from the README. You scroll down to the badges here. We've got our AppBear master branch here in Windows. So that loads up the latest build. And if we look at the latest one that passed, you look at the artifacts. We're not building that anymore. Great. That's awesome. When did we stop building that? Only got the test artifacts for every single one. Okay. Maybe that happens in the nightly build. I apologize. But the point is we build an AppX. We know how to build the AppX. We know how to sign the AppX manually. It takes a little bit longer than we'd like it to. But the bigger problem is that we're operating inside of looks like it's not on there at all, so I got to talk to some people.
We were building it.
We were building the AppX every single build. But we're inside of the store sandbox, which essentially means that the only thing you can use it for is as a remoting client to other machines. That's really the sort of only scenario that I find it useful for. You can obviously do file system management and all that sort of stuff for what you have permissions for as a sort of unprivileged user, but yeah, you can't do anything administrative on the local machine. So maybe there's some people, I'd love to hear some discussion on this call about whether that's useful to people. It's really an administrative and logistical exercise that we have to go through to, compile it all the time and publish it to the store and keep it up to date. But again, it may be kind of confusing in sort of the underprivileged, PowerShell 6 and people about that. So to answer some more of these questions here, MSI is a four-letter word. I don't like MSIs. The zips do work. There is a chocolatey installer that Darwin set up. Thank you, Darwin. I see. Due to the pre-release version being used, it doesn't show up publicly, right? So obviously, when we're public and production ready, then chocolatey will also be an installation mechanism. It's not a side-by-side problem with Windows PowerShell, Eugene.
if you're referring to sort of our logistical problems with updating Windows PowerShell, that's more around how source control is managed with Windows and how we check things in from GitHub, where we manage our own build infrastructure and test infrastructure, and Windows has completely separate infrastructure. If you're talking about the sort of installation problem, as Darwin said, actually MSI and Zips both support N versions side by side, so you can install as many PowerShell 6s as you like, regardless of what other PowerShell you have on the machine. But yeah, I mean, really, my big thing is by the time we ship, we should have as many mechanisms as is feasible. We want Docker containers. Yep, Trevor just said that right there. Docker containers. We will have a nano server Docker container running PowerShell 6. We actually already do, and that's, by the way, let's see here, hub.docker.com/r/Microsoft/PowerShell. Always forget R. And you'll see we have all these tags here. All these are beta 1, except for this OpenSUSE 13.2. We should probably delete this guy. It's an older version. But if I can't remote to my Linux boxes because I'm missing SSH, PowerShell 6 inside the store sandbox could be useful if we could do SSH. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of my thinking as well. The hardest part there, I think, is messaging. Hey, you can't run this version as admin. Could you guys ship a PowerShell container with the OMI PSRP pre-installed? Debug PowerShell applications running in containers. So that's the OMI WS-man-based server pre-installed into PowerShell on Linux. I actually don't know. Do you know, Steve, to what extent our debugging currently works?
It should
work. PSRP over SSH?
Yeah, there was nothing that the debugging code needed to change. I believe that was demoed.
Okay.
It should be functional. I'm just wondering, so just for Linux images, like what if we actually had SSH remoting enabled instead?
I'm confused. Yeah, so WSMan is supported on Linux. It's just not built in.
It's also limited is my main thing I'm trying to get across.
Right, and it's highly limited by authentication and all that stuff. But yes, SSH remoting is built in. You just have to add that subsystem line to your SSHD config.
So we should probably, I think it would be great if maybe Trevor, you can open up an issue on GitHub so we don't forget this, to at least enable SSH remoting on our Docker images that we publish, meaning the configurations change for PowerShell. And then separately, we can have the one for WSMan remoting, and then we can treat those as two separate things.
Yeah, and I would love to sort of get a feel of when SSH is incapable of accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish. You already had a pull request here, okay. Client is built in, server is not. Yes, exactly, Ben. So WSMan, and again, I owe you guys a blog post on this, but think of this as a 2x2 grid of sort of Linux server, Windows server, and then SSH or PS or WSMan, excuse me. 3 out of those 4 are built in. Yes, debug PowerShell and containers. I think there should be a way to do that. So Darwin is saying, can I get volunteers to test the iOS installer in my pull request? What do you mean by iOS?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about that.
Oh, sorry, OS X. Yeah, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Windows guy.
No worries. Yeah, so we should get this. This is awesome. I apologize. I must have been out of town when you posted this because I haven't seen this, but this is seriously. This would actually help a bunch of people internally if we got this finished. You're saying.
I took what was there in the old one, and then I think Travis relayed some details to me about how to do a repo-based install, since the brew installer is being kept up to date now. So I kind of hacked them together along with the working patterns for Linux that I had done, and I'm hoping that it works, but I don't know. It could even have syntax errors.
Got it. Got it. All right, I'll give this thing a check. Yeah, it looks like, I mean, I apologize, the silly spelling thing that's kind of breaking this. I don't know why the spelling thing doesn't see this as code. It's kind of...
I think it might have had to do in the one case with the word said because it came immediately after a bullet, but that was the only thing I could figure out. But doing the code quotes got it to go through.
Oh yeah. I use those code fences liberally because it does protect me from all that spelling. So we've got a couple more comments here. I'm gonna get rid of the participants. So yeah, and I, like I said, Darwin, we'll get that looked at because we do want to we want that download.sh. I mean, in the work you've done with the OpenSSH installer, I mean, we can't thank you enough. That's super useful too. And I think, as Steve alluded to, we may be talking to you about maybe getting some of that wrapped up as a provider for package management, so that we can have a more robust way of installing OpenSSH. We'll talk more.
Cool.
As Trevor said, and I think there's other people that want this as well. Fire up a container, create a remote session to it, enter PS host process debugging, attach VS Code PowerShell to it so I can step through execution. I think that would be super useful. Totally agreed. We should have some kind of demo of that at some point in the near future, whether it's SSH or WSMan-based remoting. And I think going through the exercise of finding out which of the two protocols that scenario works for would be useful. And yes, Joshua, it says, not sure if the debugger is decoupled from VS Code, but it needs some love.
Can you get some more details on that one?
Yeah, would love to hear more there. So we do have the PowerShell debugger, and then VS Code use
editor services.
PowerShell editor services, which goes through that debugger layer to do a lot of what it's doing. Is there something right now that you're not able to debug, whether it's from VS Code or from the terminal?
Yeah, can I talk?
Yeah, go for it.
It just seems to crash pretty often trying to jump into host processes. I'm constantly. I mean, it's such a stellar product that I'm not turned off by it by any means, because it's got capability and ease of use that wasn't there before. But it still crashes, and it seems when you're rapidly trying to go into. Actually, I would say going into run spaces. Host processes, DSC. These are things that it's just not as fluid as trying to debug a module or a class by itself. I mean, that's so quick.
Yeah.
It just seems to.
You're talking about it's from VS Code or from the terminal?
From VS Code.
Okay.
So like,
and you're saying that DSC resources seem to be a little worse of an experience there?
Yeah, it just seems to crash pretty often.
Okay. And you're running the latest VS Code plugin, like 1.0?
I'm running the Insiders VS Code. Is that what you mean?
Okay. Well, I mean the version of the plugin as well. The there's like if you click that little extensions button on the left of the window, there's a
check out PowerShell.
Yeah, there may be an update there. So
no, yeah, I'm up to date.
Let's go to cool. So definitely, I would say anytime it crashes, you should get a stack trace dump there in the terminal, hopefully. And if that's the case, definitely go to the VS Code PowerShell repo. And file an issue here. It says it looks like there's already caught an error. He's asking for system details, and then basically just say, hey, this is what I ran right before that stack trace hit, and then you can dump that into the attached log. How to report those problems in more detail. So please file issues.
The path. Before we get to that, are there other? VS Code.
Yes, let's talk about the path in just a minute. latest VS Code install one and all my virus protection to install properly. My restart manager. That's very strange. You're talking about Visual Studio Code itself, right?
Yeah, the built-in installer. And then, of course, I did the typical end-user stuff of saying, cancel that, no, go ahead. And then it was taking a really long time, so I killed it. I totally hosed VS Code altogether. I had to go in and uninstall it. I didn't have to go in and do any delete cleanups, but then I was eventually able to get it back on. But
it's very strange. Yeah, I would file an issue here. This is the official VS Code repo. They're pretty responsive for the most part, and if there's a security issue there, we definitely want to know about it.
Yeah, it was odd because it was trying both. Like I had Malwarebytes and Viper, and it was wanting to end both. Not like one of them had a lock, and it was just a fluke.
Got it. You're still probably not the first one to hit it, so yeah, it's something they should probably figure out there. I do want to talk about your next one here, which was this PS6 path. So it's probably not a good idea to put PowerShell 6 on the path on a Windows machine. So there's sort of a lot of different issues around environment variables here, right? And one of the main things, just at an Uber level, that we're trying to push, and that we actually have a meeting spun up with Jim Truer and Bruce Payette this week.
Hold on, just to be clear, we're not talking about the PS module path, right? You're just talking about the binary path.
Binary path.
Yeah, but I
go ahead.
Get at it in just a second here. So in general, we are trying to move away from environment variables because we have problems with case sensitivity on Linux. We're working through ways to mitigate that as well, but just it's really a painful experience because environment variables are not the same on Windows and on Linux, and these sorts of things really should be handled, local to PowerShell itself. And so we have this RFC here that we'd love some feedback on in the issues. It's basically around how can we do startup configuration of PowerShell. We can specify, for instance, PowerShell module paths for different instances of or different operating systems, right? But what you're talking about is, okay, how do I run, when I do, Windows R and I type PowerShell, how am I going to get, PowerShell 6? That's what you're asking about, right?
More specifically, since they all install side by side, the Chocolate installer will uninstall old versions, I think. But still, if I want to point, I would like to get the latest, and without it something to point to the latest, then I have to go look through the folder and do a criteria to find the latest. It's not a huge deal, but it would just be nicer just to be able to say, okay, I always want whatever the latest one installs, it registers itself as the latest here. I also go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so we do have an issue open to solve that, where I think the idea was that we have a symbolic link that gets updated from the installer. This wouldn't work with deploying zip.
Yeah, that one, like this guy right here, 3464. So like Python has this concept of VENV, virtual environment. Ruby has RBENV. I mean, it's not a fun solution, but it's to some extent it's the least bad solution that exists, and it's one we'll probably have to adopt at some point. But yeah, I mean it's symbolic link management and creating constrained little sandboxes where you can run in one version and not another, and that's we just need to make our
just a meta comment about now that you've brought this up, the two things of moving away from environment variables and towards symbolic links. I don't know. To me, if you're managing a fleet of machines, having to muck about parsing a script to repoint something seems much more heinous than just watching the casing of your environment variables. And environment variables are one thing that actually do work very consistently across the platforms and are available on all the platforms as far as I'm aware. I thought that RFC was to reduce the internal dependency of PowerShell on environment variables, but I think it would be very different to start encouraging those writing scripts not to depend on them. And I think
I totally agree, and that was I apologize for my sentiment not being expressed that way, but that's where our heads are at too.
okay.
We've got an RFC out and we're now sort of moving to a pull request-based flow for RFCs where we try to get all the comments. For the ones that are still already accepted as drafts, we've got comments and issues here. But this one here, we want to introduce some commandlets for managing environment variables, and I have some thoughts in particular about how we can extend this thing to try and mitigate some of the environment variable problems. So we may have, by default, new environment variable or set environment variable might auto uppercase all, the name of the environment variable passed to it, whereas env would reflect the, the raw casing, case sensitive sort of through from the operating system of the environment variable. And then obviously we'd have some sort of parameter on set environment variable to, not auto uppercase or something like that. But, there are ways we can mitigate these things, but we'd have to push them through best practices and script analyzer rules and that sort of thing. But I think just internally, like we said, like PS module path is an issue. Some of these other path-based environment variables just become hard to manage. One of the other things that a lot of people haven't thought about is the environment variables have different separators on Windows and Linux. So it's actually semicolons on Windows and colons on Linux, and then the slashes go the other way. That's something we'd have to mitigate as well. So
yeah, and
it's
actually,
a tricky problem.
so actually, you're talking about the tricky problem of path environment variables, and that's actually much different than just straight environment variables as far as getting into tricky stuff. Actually, I wrote a whole blog post on that recently, and I have some code. Here, I'll post it here, but I could also post it to the RFC about all the problems of just using some of the standard code or the boilerplate code you find out there for updating environment variables, like unexpanded versus expanded environment variables within the path, and on it goes, and grabbing the process path and then jamming it into the machine persistent path. And there's just tons of problems with it. So if you actually created either one especially for path environment variables or internally handled path environment variables in a slick way, that would probably solve a lot of pain for a lot of people.
Totally, yeah. No, I think that's something we absolutely want to look into, and thank you for that. I'll definitely check out that blog post after the call. I do want to address some of these remoting issues that have sort of come up in the chat since then. So this one, Trevor, the macOS MI result access denied. From a Mac, all we support is basic authentication today with WSMan. Mac to Windows over SSH, as Ashley said, should work totally fine. But enter PSS and computer name credential is going to go over WSMan. The PowerShell or the PSRP over SSH syntax, if you look at, let's see real quick, get command, what's that? Yeah, host name is, right. So we actually, instead of computer name here, for the SSH-based one, we use host name. And then we have a port option there. It's username instead of credential.
You can use -SSH transport.
SSH transport.
But it's not necessary if you just use host name. Because then you'll figure out the right parameter fit that you're using.
I personally prefer to just do, etsin hostname -SSH transport, and I don't have to remember the hostname versus computer.
Either way works.
Hey, Joey.
We did go with that.
This is
the language. Yeah. No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, this is Trevor. I just stepped out of the meeting really quick. So I posted a gist there, and I'm running beta 1 on the Mac, and I was looking for -key file path for SSH remoting, which is in that document you sent earlier, and my system doesn't have that.
Interesting. I see it on this one right here. Were you using computer name?
Well, so I just did get help and was looking at the syntax section of enter PS session.
Don't use that. That's the old help. Use the get command and then do the dash syntax, and you'll get the one that's actually in the code. That's probably something we need to fix.
This is a totally legitimate problem that you just brought up, which is that our get help for PowerShell 6 is woefully out of date. I just issued a PR that may have been merged yesterday. Nope. This is to add documentation requirements to contributing.md so that we have to do that in PRs because we have a backlog of all that stuff that needs to be updated in the system. Get command dash syntax is the way to get the actual parameter sets. And I assure you that it is on.
It was before beta 1. I mean, that was probably like,
Yeah.
I don't know,
15 or
something like that. Don't remember exactly.
But yeah, unfortunately, it's basic auth. And I can see, yeah, this just, there's no key file parameter. Yeah, it's, like I said, I can do Edson SSH transfer. And for those of you that aren't SSH gurus, key file path, we can essentially do key-based authentication instead of password-based authentication. So you can manage your private keys locally in your home directory and then just point at them to log into the server where you've set up your authorized keys file, which basically is a public key representation of those key files.
And just to be clear, key file path is only necessary if you don't have it in the default location or you want to use a different key.
Yes.
So it will pick up the one in your I think it's under .ssh in your tree on Windows or on Linux.
Okay, the rest of this I think we've addressed. As we're reading down here, I'm going to assume that this comment about Pascal casing all files and environment variables is
Well, the smiley face.
maybe a joke. Although environment variables, you know, I think unfortunately for Linux, that's going to break a bunch of stuff.
It definitely will break a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
The convention on Linux is all uppercase.
Stefan says, can we start pushing for using forward slashes on Windows too?
Well, the thing is, if you're in PowerShell, then you can use forward slashes all you want on Windows, and it'll convert it correctly.
Yes. The other thing that I think I'd like to push for is like a VS Code quick fix through Script Analyzer and or through the VS Code plugin that just lets you automatically change all the slashes. Other PowerShell won't care, but I know realistically people will care.
PowerShell does care when you are doing some things like, I think it was calling .NET classes. Maybe it wasn't .NET classes. There was something I was doing where the underlying, many times the underlying thing that you're calling does care. And so to just have something carte blanche rip through a script and flip them all would be disastrous.
You're correct in that only PowerShell itself is the one that's agnostic to it, and .NET cares about the slashes for the operating system.
Okay, so .NET itself does. Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah,
that's
so we're
what
not doing any match to .NET calls.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you did do some sort of parser, it would be beneficial for it to only touch anything that is a PowerShell commandlet.
Yes, and that would, yeah, we'd essentially have to tokenize the whole thing and know which are commandlet calls or .NET method calls, which are being used with native utilities. This is Ben's YouTube video. Yeah, so to allow unencrypt or add 5986 endpoint, that's correct. I believe that's Ben's talk that has all that stuff in there, which I need to watch because I missed it. I was there. Yeah, and with basic auth you can use HTTPS, which will still encrypt all of the traffic over the wire. If you don't do that, then your password's being passed in plain text. All right, does anyone else have any questions?
Just topics you want to talk about?
Having issues doing SSH into a Mac? There should not be any issues there, but if you run into it, definitely let me know. And yes, that is going, Stefan, that's going through the .NET layer, path normalization for us. Okay, so if nobody else has any major topics, I think I'm just going to go Yeah, Win32 may break in some cases. I don't know what the... I bet you there's some Win32 APIs that work.
It's going to just depend on the API. You want to talk about high priority?
Mm-hmm. Working solutions project for VS Code Visual Studio. Yeah, so with the move to Beta 1, we moved over to .NET Core 2.0. I'm just going to do like 2 or 3 minutes really quick for those of you that are not familiar with .NET Core 2.0. So this was a massive pull request that we took just before releasing Beta 1. It enables something called .NET Standard 2.0. And I can, there's some great links. I mean, if we just Google here, there's some great stuff on, there's an FAQ in this repository on what .NET Standard 2.0 is. Shoot, I should have. There's a great blog post here explaining what it is. Both of these have YouTube video links. Emo Landworth does some phenomenal YouTube videos explaining .NET Standard 2.0. Essentially what this gives us is IL compatible DLLs. So that's a really, really fancy way to say we can now take a ton of full CLR binaries that were built on 4.5.1 or 4.6.1 and load them inside of PowerShell without doing a recompile of those binaries. So .NET Standard defines some API set that is common to both .NET Framework and .NET Core, and it allows DLLs compiled for either to work in any .NET Standard 2.0 compliant CLR like 2.0. So what we're currently experimenting with is, say I'm sitting here inside of Beta.1, and I want to load up a Windows PowerShell module that shipped with Windows, right? A lot of these are CDXML, and those will just work. For instance, I was playing with scheduled tasks the other day. Great. That's built for full CLR PowerShell, but that thing spits out scheduled tasks. If I try to do the same thing today with Hyper-V, well, I don't have Hyper-V installed on this machine. That's great. But say I do, I don't know, AppLocker was, yeah. So if I do this one, it says, it had a nested module problem. It couldn't find this module here because that's not on my PS module path. But let me see here. Basically, if I do one that has a DLL dependency, like this one is a big-ism. Yeah, this guy probably has some sort of DLL dependency. That actually happened to work. The cool thing is a bunch of these already just work, right?
That one might be.
But for ones where it's not CDXML, but for ones where there's a DLL dependency like Hyper-V, it's going to go, I don't have the DLLs, I don't know how to look in the GAC. Well, we have a prototype right now internally where, or not internally, it's in somebody's fork somewhere. We don't do anything internally anymore. But we basically go and look in the GAC directories for those DLLs. And despite the fact that they were never built for .NET Core, never recompiled, we can actually load the Hyper-V module and use those commandlets natively in PowerShell Core 6.0, which is awesome because it means we've got this ramp between Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core where we don't have to ask all these module developers to rewrite their modules to work with .NET Core. We can just load them. And a bunch of scripts are going to continue working in PowerShell 6 that would not have with the previous Office. Before
we move off that topic, so one thing I want to mention is, so one big fundamental difference between full CLR and Core CLR is really the GAC, the Global Assembly Cache, which is not supported by Core CLR. So there is Hyper-V is a good example where a lot of the managed assemblies on inbox modules are actually stored in the GAC. The Core CLR has no knowledge of that. So we do have an open issue that's being worked on to enable opt-in support of loading those modules by doing some level of discovery in the GAC.
That's signed to it right now?
Yeah, it's signed to it too. So it's not being worked on. It's not enabled yet. But once that is enabled, then hopefully that means that on Windows, you can install PowerShell Core 6 and should, barring whatever experience we decide on, you should just load up full CLR modules and just use them for the most part. There's a couple of things that won't work, like snap-in, for example, is deprecated, and it turns out there are some Windows inbox modules that will snap-in.
Yeah, so as we said, we're sort of discussing whether this is opt-in or opt-out. Now, one thing I also want to point out, we've got this sort of new milestone in the issues, is we really have 2 buckets, or 3 buckets now actually. So we've got 6.0 beta 2. These issues will come here as we expect them to be finished for the next release. So in other words, anything that someone finishes, they should place in the beta 2 milestone, so we know that that's going out with the next release. The next bucket of work that is...
By the way, beta 2 is our regular cadence, so it has a date. So if you go back to like the milestones.
Yeah, if I click here to milestones, you can actually see that we're putting out beta 2 on or right around June 1st.
So we're trying to stick to like a 3-week cadence for beta releases. And beta 3 would be 3 weeks after that, and et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. And for each of those betas, we'll be plucking out of this 6.0 high priority. So these are all things that we think are high priority that we need to, we absolutely, P0 that we need to do in order to ship PowerShell 6. And then we've got another bucket of stuff that we're continuing to triage into the high priority bucket that we're all sort of either important or, maybe somewhat less important, nice to haves for 6.0. We still, we haven't cut anything out of here yet, but this is a bucket that you may expect to see things get cut out of as we get closer and closer along the process. Now, one of the things we really love to hear from you guys is sort of how stable do you think this thing is, right, from a holistic standpoint? We want to increase our code coverage. Right now, I think it's at 47%. We'd like to get it up to 80%. At some point in the future, it's 40, but I think that's slightly bugged.
The data, actually, the code coverage data is no longer accurate because once we moved to .NET Standard 2.0, the tooling broke. So we're working through that. So the number is a historical number at this point.
But again, the number is just a number, and so we'd love to hear from you guys. How do you feel about this? Are you able to use it for real stuff? Trevor's saying, "Oh, I really would love to be able to debug the inside of Docker containers using PowerShell." Well, if you can do that today and it kind of works for you, or totally works for you, then maybe, maybe we're more stable or quote-unquote production ready than we think. And so really, from a holistic standpoint, we'd love to hear those sorts of things. I'm just seeing here the sort of interop module. You guys are talking about how to use native libraries here. So, I mean, there's really the big thing that we want to do first is getting, as Steve said, getting to a stable place with 6.0 so that we have a common platform across Windows and Linux. We've mitigated all or as many of the platform differences as we can. After that, we've talked about all kinds of crazy fun stuff like reflecting on Python classes and, maybe there's room to reflect on other language classes. Obviously calling into native binaries would be sweet as well, something like a p-invoke for Linux. I think can you do p-invokes on Linux?
You can.
Yeah, so I think that's actually partially possible. We should maybe throw an example up of that.
Well, if you look through our code, we do that, I think, for something.
Yeah, definitely. I vaguely remember talking about it.
I mean, if you go to the if you go back to the milestones, you can kind of see like again, nothing's set in stone, but kind of like the initial thinking for 6.1 milestone in terms of the things we're looking at.
Great.
And it's really like, targeting the developer, so, getting the domain-specific language stuff in there, getting improvements to classes. Concurrency will probably show up there. I don't know if it's going to make it in for 6.0. And then things like, improving the interactive experience. So Reline itself has something like 200, I think around 200 something issues, and we need to throw some of our full-time resources to addressing some of those. There's some other things in there I don't remember now, but the description for the milestone has kind of like a high-level view, and we're also open for feedback on that because, to be honest, I don't think everything's going to make it, and once we get past 6.0, I want to kind of have a little bit more frequent major milestone releases. So let's say maybe 6 months release for 6.1, and then 6.2, and then 6.3, heading towards 5 billion, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, can I clarify what I was talking about?
Totally.
The platform native module load, I'm talking about some naming convention for module writers when they need to have different implementations on different platforms, or there are existing native libraries. So you could have the loader load like NuGet is, if you look at the structure. You automatically, by convention, get the right library depending on the platform you're building for or using. Something like that in the module directory when you create your own modules.
Yeah, so I think this is the issue that's sort of tracking that problem right now, and it's definitely, we've got it in the 6.0 high priority bucket to solve. But I think you're talking about like this issue, right? Where you have all these native binaries that are going to be specific to different platforms.
Yeah.
And you essentially need a way to select on those things. And you know, should we have some sort of a naming convention to automatically pick up a DLL that has a platform modifier or something like that.
Or continue to reuse the syntax and capabilities we have in module manifest, where on the required assemblies you can, for the key on the value side, you can do if else, and that might be another approach where we have to expose or allow a couple of variables that you can do, like if OS Linux and OS Windows or is Windows kind of stuff, or maybe PS version table. That's another idea, but then it puts the burden on the module author rather than people knowing the conventions and trying to follow that.
Yeah, I mean, ideally we'd have something like .NET runtime IDs, which are the RIDs, and I think these things are like sort of nested. Like the big problem, is it runtime IDs or?
It's runtime IDs. But you probably just pull it out.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah. So the big problem with these things are they're sort of it's a nested problem, right? You've got the OS, which may be Ubuntu, right? But this is like this is demonstrating of the RID graph, right? You've got anything Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 8 ARM, Windows 8 1 ARM, and 10 ARM. Right? Like how do you there's not a single dimension of sort of delineating on different platforms. These things, they blow up pretty fast. But maybe there's a place for us to sort of emulate this behavior and do the same sort of thing. I think regardless, at a high level, we need to solve the problem of what's the pattern for module authors to take dependencies on native binaries that have different binaries for different platforms, and maybe it's even something we do at like install time, right? There's been some desire not to ship every native binary with every, or with a sort of monolithic module. So maybe at install time we offer a way for PowerShell Get to reach out and grab native binaries off of NuGet based on the platform that you're on. There's a lot of stuff that we can do here, but
so just to do a quick time check because we're about 4 minutes. Maybe what you can show Joe real quick is the developer experience project. So for all the module authors, you guys should probably take a look at this project to make sure that we're capturing all the stuff that we are targeting for the 6.0 release, and if something's not in here that you care about, and there's a bunch, I think, for triage as well if you look at the add cards.
Yeah, so we go here. I need to start triaging these in. It looks like we actually did that one.
But you can kind of get a sense of, these are things we're trying to commit to doing in the 6.0 timeframe, specifically for the developer experience SDK.
It's definitely yeah. So there's stuff that we need to do here for sure. But yeah, definitely check these out. I'll finish triaging these later today, so you guys can can see a complete view there, and I'll go ahead and paste this link in as well. Josh was asking about Swagger work. I think we've demoed. No.
None. Probably.
I don't know what you guys are talking about.
We're looking at it. I mean, it's something obviously like Swagger it's schematized data, right? And PowerShell likes schematized data. So
one thing we'll just say, like for the 601 things we're definitely targeting is, maintaining cloud assets, which includes like REST calls from both directions. So we're interested in this area.
Says, what does the experimental stage mean? Does that mean there's a version of the feature implemented somewhere to play with? And that is yes. So that for instance, like I think that the
DSL one I think is one that we have in there.
Yeah, so this is currently this has not been merged into the main project, but there's a pull request that is functional where you can play. You go to
you clone that branch and build it. You can play with that today.
Right.
There is active work happening with one of my engineers to get the DSL experimental work in, so we can start playing with that and getting feedback.
Where did that go?
It was just for author. Oh, that one.
There we go. Yeah, so this is the DSL PR.
Right. And there is a RFC which explains the various stages and what each term means. So.
Yeah, and that has been appended. I have it in my backlog to write something that is sort of the this RFC workflow, the draft right here. This is actually the process. I know it's not being 100% followed today with older RFCs because we didn't really have a transition path for the new process, but this is the most up-to-date thing. I want to do like a step 1, step 2, step 3 guide. Here's how to submit an RFC. And yeah, just sit on my backlog right now. Probably a blog post, probably also posted in the repo.
Yeah, probably. We have already moved towards using pull requests, but we're not changing stuff with the ones already in draft.
And the impetus there is so you can go in here and when you look at files changed, you can actually just add a comment directly to whatever's there. And you can actually start a review and say, I accept this or whatever. So yeah, I think we're out of time here. You guys have been awesome today. I really appreciate it. This has been super. I'm glad to hear that everybody's still interested in remoting. I will definitely try and get some of those demos and documentation updated. And please let us know if you're having any issues, especially on the SSH side where I believe everything should be working right now. Shameless plug, I'm doing a thing with the St. Louis PowerShell user group tonight. I'm going to be demoing a couple SSH things real quick and a few PowerShell 6 sort of editions. So I don't know if you're in the St. Louis area, but check in.
It's going to get recorded.
I think it is going to get recorded, yeah. So, but thank you guys. Is that go ahead. I think it's at the Microsoft store. It's being run by Michael T. Lombardi. Awesome guy. So definitely.